Can you believe that it's been a full decade since Konami announced Silent Hills, the much anticipated reboot from Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro? If you're a fan of the long-running series, then the last 10 years have been a little rough, to say the least. Thankfully, the incredible new Silent Hill 2 remake is here to remind us just why we fell in love with the series in the first place. To help celebrate the success of this recently released remake, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Computer and Video Games, Next Generation, and more classic magazines to see what the critics thought of the first two Silent Hill games back when they first came out. I sure hope you don't mind fog, because you're about to enter the Silent Hill review crew.
Silent Hill.
After years of companies trying to outdo each other with the more adorable mascot platformer, the writing was on the wall. Gamers were ready for something new. That change came in the form of Resident Evil, a dark and violent horror game that felt like it was made directly for the PlayStation's more mature audience. Obviously, that success led to a horror game arms race where companies far and wide tried to get in on that trend. One of the few that actually stuck with gamers was Konami's Silent Hill, a survival horror game that took a more psychological approach and upped the amount of fog by about 1,000. While a little clunky, Silent Hill was a big winner for Konami, spawning decades worth of sequels and spin-offs, as well as a couple of big-budget Hollywood movies. Now let's go back to 1999 and see how the first game kicked things off. As you might expect, Electronic Gaming Monthly took no time at all comparing the two big horror games of the 32-bit era. Dan said that Resident Evil is to Night of the Living Dead what Silent Hill is to Hellraiser. Talk about a creepy game! It starts off slow, but once you get an hour into it, things can get really tense. By the way, do not let your children see this game. Crispin agreed. Even more so than the Resident Evil games, this thing pushes all your fear buttons. Its dim visuals, discordant music, jarring sound effects, and twisted story are disturbing on so many levels. You'll need to fiddle with the options before the game becomes playable, and I had gripes about the camera and control throughout the game. EGM ended up giving Silent Hill an average score of 8.6 out of 10. That score is basically smack dab in the middle of the scale. Edge gave the original Silent Hill a score of 8 out of 10, which is a lot better than the C+ that it received at Entertainment Weekly. Speaking of low scores, Computer and Video Games couldn't muster up the enthusiasm to give Silent Hill more than a 3 out of 5. At one point they complained that Silent Hill isn't scary? No, really. There's also the simple fact that it's in no way scary at all. The levels are too similar and the set piece sections are too obvious to make any difference. Some of the conversations between the characters seem so false that it ruins any tension. There's no doubt that it's a good game and we recommend you try it. But when you compare it to Resident Evil, as we have throughout this review, and as Konami have by billing it as a horror game, it simply doesn't cut the mustard. The good news is that most of the critics actually liked Silent Hill. For example, Australian gaming magazine Hyper went all the way up to 90%, making it one of their best reviewed games of the year. PSM agreed, giving it the equivalent 4.5 out of 5. That's the same score that we saw over at GamePro. Silent Hill's scares are everywhere. The tension is high throughout the game, and it gets creepier as you delve deeper and face winged bees, bald freaks, and devil dogs. The gothic storyline and intuitive puzzles are also compelling, which makes Silent Hill a nice bridge for Resident Evil fans waiting for their next fix. Just a few flaws short of a masterpiece, Silent Hill is definitely worth a look from horror and adventure fans. What, you're still not impressed? Don't worry, because GameFan ended up giving the horror game an average score of 92%. If you want to go even higher, then we're going to need to look in a rather surprising place. That's right, the notoriously grumpy Next Generation. They gave it a perfect 5 out of 5, but don't think that means that it's immune to criticism. They complained that out-of-place puzzles that jar the realism of some of the environments threaten to spoil the mood that Silent Hill masterfully creates, while the good amount of slow-paced exploration will likely turn off players looking for the thrill-kill instant gratification of the more action-oriented Resident Evil series. But neither of these flaws even come close to negating the real strides made by Konami in creating a game that so perfectly fleshes out a concept. Games that not only surpass their predecessors, but also genuinely capture the imagination like Silent Hill does don't come along nearly often enough. No gamer can afford to miss it. So hang on, wait a second. Is Silent Hill scary or not? I feel like these reviews can't decide. Either way, this is an effective little horror game that, feels incredibly dated all these decades later. It's still a classic, but I definitely understand why Konami decided to remake the sequel and not the original. Two years after scaring us on the original PlayStation, Konami returned to Silent Hill with a much bigger and more ambitious sequel for the PlayStation 2. Silent Hill 2 introduces us to the new protagonist, James Sunderland, a bunch of creepy locations, and a lot more fog. So much fog! It also turned up the scares, taking full advantage of the new hardware to create an even more cinematic experience. The result was so good that when Konami went to remake Silent Hill a quarter century later, they skipped right past the first game and went straight to Silent Hill 2. But what did the critics say about this iconic horror sequel back in 2001? Let's find out. Much like the original game, Electronic Gaming Monthly was a little split on Silent Hill 2. With scores ranging from a 7.5 all the way up to a 9, there were definitely some disagreements amongst these three critics. Jay called it, hands down, the scariest game ever made. Just writing about it gives me the creeps. But does that chill factor translate into greatness, or is it just aesthetic fluff? To their credit, the developers have done a lot of control tweaking to make Silent Hill 2 one of the more playable survival horror titles. Plus, the story, with its surprises and multiple endings, is much more compelling and makes more sense than its prequel. But to experience all that, you've got to wade through some incredibly tedious and arbitrary puzzles and a lot of fetch-the-keys style gameplay. Shu agreed, Silent Hill 2 is definitely scary. Partway into this game, I had to make a decision. Do I continue playing this in a lonely and quiet office? Or do I play it safe and stop for the night before the game's fright factor really got to me? Silent Hill 2 does such a tremendous job of tapping into your most primal fears with its use of sound and visual effects. Resist the urge to turn on the lights or play this with company. This game will scare you. EGM gave Silent Hill 2 an average score of 8.3 out of 10. Now that score is basically tied with Game Informer, who gave the sequel an impressive 8.25 out of 10. Next Generation was also on the same page, giving it a 4 out of 5. Their review touched on the slow pace, intriguing puzzles, and repetitive action. But what's most annoying, though you could call it a virtue depending on your taste, is the ultimate lack of explanation for anything. You can make some guesses, but coupled with a rather weak ending, the result is confusion rather than catharsis. Still, the journey is so creepy and involving that in the end it hardly matters. It's not for the faint of heart or anyone looking for fast action, but those who enjoy a good shiver won't be disappointed. In case you're wondering, it's Next Generation's sister magazine, Edge, that ended up giving Silent Hill the lowest score. Going with a so-so 7 out of 10, they called it a well-conceived, stylish, and engrossing game. While Silent Hill has never offered the explosive, monster-slaying carnage of Resident Evil, the lack of boss baddies after boss baddies makes for a quieter, more cerebral, and certainly more chilling game experience. After a few hours cocooned in the game's ceaseless darkness, with weird sounds and haunting music echoing around your living room, you will and will be truly in the game's grip. Afraid to go on, afraid to switch it off, afraid to put out the light and sleep. And if you do go on, tracking those last clues to one of the game's several surprise conclusions, you won't be disappointed. Everyone gets what's coming to them. Now, on a slightly more positive note, at least when it comes to the score, GamePro was the magazine that ended up giving the sequel the highest marks. They went with a 4.5 out of 5, calling Silent Hill 2 more of an experience than a game. Fun in a masochistic, I need a bath way rather than the traditional butt-kicking sense. Honestly, you'll probably dig this game more if you never played the original. Silent Hill 2 feels more like a remake than a sequel. More like the survival horror game that Konami wished they could have made the first time, before technology caught up to their deeply messed up vision. While Silent Hill 2's reviews didn't quite reach the same heights as the first game, they were a lot more consistent. Even the lowest score admits that this is an effective horror game that needs to be played, or as GamePro put it, experienced. Good stuff.
You promised you'd take me there again someday. James! To our special place. Silent Hill.
Silent Hill 2. Rated M for mature. For PlayStation 2. From Konami.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you'll be happy to know that we post new episodes just like this every time classic games get added to modern consoles. We have a whole playlist with more than 100 episodes, so give it a binge when you have a few minutes. Now, here's the question I have for you. What Silent Hill game should be remade next? Should they go back to the first, or maybe focused on one of the next few installments? Let me see your thoughts in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back later this week with a review of Kill Knight, as well as a big announcement for a future Electronic Gaming Monthly series. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,